Luca. Let's study finals together.
All right. Luca's here helping me make this video to help review. So we are graphing. So there's three types of graphs that you need to be familiar with. There's our basic sine and cosine graph, our secant cosecant graph, and then our tangent cotangent graph. So remember the standard form. It has our A, B, C, and D, those four variables. The A is our amplitude. Always take the positive value when you're saying what the amplitude is because it measures the height from the midline. If A is negative, that means the graph is going to be reflected, but if they're asking for the amplitude, your answer should always be positive. Our B value affects the period, how long it takes us to complete one curve of sine or cosine or whatever the graph is. So for sine, cosine, secant, cosecant, the period is usually 2 pi radians long, but it changes depending on what B is. Make sure that B is always factored out of this expression, otherwise you'll get the wrong horizontal shift. Speaking of our horizontal shift or our phase shift, we do the opposite of what this number says. If it's minus C, we go to the right, plus C, we go to the left. And then we have our vertical shift outside, we do what it says. Remember, the numbers outside of the parentheses affect our Y values, and the numbers inside here with X affect our X values. So make sure you know the basic shape, and then we do our work like this. We look at our X values and we find our Y values. So we start with our period, then take our period, divide into the 4 parts, and then move left or right if there's any phase shift. Make sure you're doing those with common denominators. So in this way you know what your tick marks are on your x-axis. Then we move on to our y values. You take your parent function y values of sine and cosine, multiply by a, and then add or subtract by d as needed. Remember your domain and range. Your domain for sine and cosine is always negative infinity to positive infinity. Your range is your maximum and your minimum values, how high and how low you go. Make sure you know how to find your maximum and minimum ordered pairs. If X, find Y, those are algebraic problems. You can find those questions in your packet. So we do very similar things for secant and cosecant. We go and we graph as if it were sine or cosine, but then wherever the points were on the midline, and remember sine has 3 points on the midline, cosine only has 2, that's where your vertical asymptotes are going to go. So then you graph the parent one or the original like sine one, and then you make your branches in between those asymptotes. So because we have those asymptotes, we have to skip this middle part. So our range is from negative infinity up to the minimum, and then we skip this whole middle part and jump to the maximum, and then we go up forever, okay? But all of these same things affect our tick marks and our points and everything the same as if we were graphing sine and cosine. Tangent and cotangent are totally different. We still have an A value that will affect our points, but no amplitude. If A is negative, it still reflects our graph, but again, no amplitude. Anytime, same thing with secant and cosecant. Actually, your amplitude here is none for secant and cosecant. Tangent and cotangent, your amplitude, if they ask for the amplitude, your amplitude is none. Our B value still affects our period, but the period for tangent and cotangent is just 1 pi. And then make sure you know your graph. So it goes at 0, it's tangent centered through the origin, and then it increases with your asymptotes at plus or minus pi over 2, and then cotangent, there's an asymptote through the origin, so asymptotes at 0 and at pi, so it's centered here, and it decreases. So we can change the y values with any a or d values that you might see. So that's a quick, very quick summary of graphing. So as far as our worksheet goes, you'll notice that all of the review problems for graphing were on the non-calculator. That's because all of the graphing problems are going to be on the non-calculator portion of your final. So notice cosine, what is the amplitude? The A value is -8, but our amplitude is positive. Here, which of the following is the correct graph? You can go through and graph and find the period, find the tick marks, find the A values, multiply them by 3. You can go through those whole steps of finding your X values and your Y values, and goes through all those steps and graph them and see which one matches. But you can also remember the main characteristics. Our cosine graph, our first point for cosine is either above or below the midline. So when we look here, this point, the first point is on the midline, so it can't be C. this first point is above, so it might be this one. This first point is on the midline, so that means it's a sine graph. So it can't be C, B, or C, right? So our cosine graphs are A and D. We can narrow it down there. Because our A value is positive, we know our first point should be above the midline. So because of those characteristics, and there was no phase shift, so we know our first point was going to be on the y-axis. We knew D is the correct answer. But we can also, like I said, go through the work of finding the x values and the y values and see which one matches. Or, and this is a great strategy for multiple choice, is you can pick one point on each graph and plug it into the original equation and see if that point satisfies the equation. So that's what I'm doing here. So I just did it for D so you can see. I'm going to pick an easy point for myself, which is 0, 3. I'm going to take 0, 3 and plug it into the equation. So this is the original equation. I'm going to plug in 0 for x, 3 for y, and I'm going to evaluate this. 2 times 0, 0. Cosine of 0 is 1. 3 times 1 is 3. And then 3 equals 3. So the point 0, 3 satisfies this equation. So that means this point works, which means this whole graph probably works. As long as there's no other graph with this point, then we're good to go. Okay. On the flip side, if we looked at number 17, if we wanted to try that strategy, and like I tried here by picking the point 0, 0, when I plugged in 0 for x, 0 for y for this new equation, sine of 0, 0. 2 times 0 is 0. 0 minus 2 is negative 2. Is negative 2 equal to 0? No. So that means this cannot be my answer. Any graph with a point at 0, 0 isn't going to be my answer. So that means this one is also not going to be my answer, which leaves me with these two graphs. So now when I try 0, 2, I get 2 equals negative 2. That's not going to work. This one will work. 0, negative 2, if I were to plug it into here, I would get that it satisfies, it makes the equation true. So notice we can just fall back on some really basic algebra skills with these multiple choice answers. Like I said, you can always use our more formal steps of finding the tick marks, taking the y values and applying like multiply by 2, subtract 2, and then see which ones match up. You can definitely use that, but with multiple choice, all strategies are available to you. So this is just working backwards. Again, you can look at this and ask yourself like what horizontal or vertical shifts or what phase shifts do I see? You can also take a point like 0, 1. Like if we were to take this point here, 0, 1, and plug in 0 for x and 1 for y, would this equation be true? Cosine of pi over 2 is 0. It's not 1. So I know that's not the equation. What if I put in a 0 for x and a 1 for y? When I evaluate this, what is sine of pi over 2? Sine of pi over 2 is 1. Ding, 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 winner, right? And we would need to like plug it in to make sure this is the only one that satisfies it, but that's a way faster and way easier, I think, method to solve. And so we can do that with all of these guys. We can use the formal method, or we can just pick a point and plug it in and see which one is true. You might see for like 0, 0, it makes both of those true. So you have to pick another point, but you can try a couple and do that. So range is looking at the y values. Where are the asymptotes? It's where the original zeros were. Domain is always negative to positive infinity. Period, remember, for tangent and cotangent is 1 pi over b. The others is 2 pi over b. More of either actually doing the work to graph, or you can pick a couple points and plug it in to see which one makes it true. And then lastly, don't forget to factor out the b so that you know what your phase shift is. And remember, any numbers outside of the parentheses affect the vertical or the y values. Any numbers inside the parentheses affect the x values. Whew, that was fast. Hopefully you guys were able to spend some more quality time with this than speeding through like I did. But go ahead and discuss with your groups, and then let's take this quiz. See you later.